My name is Evelyn Monroe, and that Tuesday afternoon in October, I just needed $2,000 to finish my technical certification. It wasn't a casual request. I hadn't asked my family for anything in years, but my savings had dried up after an emergency car repair, and I was 3 months away from completing a program that would change everything for me. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special greeting for you in an upcoming story. I drove to my Aunt Martha's house in my old Honda, the same car I'd had since high school. The suburban street in Columbus, Ohio, looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago, when I used to visit as a kid. White picket fences, manicured lawns, and that suffocating sense of perfection that always made me feel like I didn't belong. Aunt Martha answered the door, wearing her usual pearls and that tight smile she reserved for people she tolerated rather than loved. "Evelyn, what a surprise. Come in, I suppose." The living room was filled with the usual suspects. My cousin Rebecca, my uncle Tom, and a few other relatives, whose names I'd stopped trying to remember after they made it clear I was the family disappointment. "I need to ask you all something," I said, standing in the middle of their cream-colored carpet. "I'm 3 months away from finishing my IT certification, and I need $2,000 to complete it. I'll pay it back within 6 months, with interest if you want." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Rebecca started to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated laugh that made everyone else join in. $2,000? For what? Community college?" she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "It's a technical certification that will get me into cybersecurity," I explained, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "Ask the army to pay for it," Rebecca said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "That's what they're for, right?" Aunt Martha set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Evelyn, you've made your choices. You chose to join the military instead of going to college like a normal person. You chose to live in that tiny apartment instead of settling down. You never were quite right for this family." I stood there for a moment, looking at their faces. These people who had never worked a day in their lives, who inherited their comfortable existence, who had never known what it felt like to earn something from nothing. I picked up my jacket from the chair and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Uncle Tom called after me. I didn't answer. I just left my untouched coffee cup on their perfect table and walked out into the autumn air. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of red lights and bitter thought. I couldn't stop hearing Rebecca's laughter. Couldn't forget the way Aunt Martha had looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. When I got home, I found a voicemail from my cousin Sarah, Martha's youngest daughter. "Hey Evelyn. I heard about what happened today. Look, I think you should know that after you left, Rebecca said some pretty awful things. She said you were probably lying about the certification, that you just wanted money for drugs, or something stupid. I'm sorry, I wanted to say something, but you know how they are." I sat on my couch in my small one-bedroom apartment, looking at the stack of textbooks on my coffee table. Network security fundamentals, ethical hacking, digital forensics. I'd been studying for months, working double shifts at the base commissary to pay for the course materials. Every page represented hours of lost sleep. Every chapter, a small victory against the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Aunt Martha telling me I wasn't good enough. The next morning, I reported to base like nothing had happened. Staff Sergeant Williams noticed something was off during our morning briefing. "Monroe, you look like someone stole your lunch money. Everything okay?" "Just family stuff, Sergeant," I said, keeping my eyes on the paperwork in front of me. "Family stuff has a way of staying with you if you let it," he said. "Don't let it mess with your head. You've got good things coming." If only he knew how right he was. I spent the next week picking up every extra shift I could find. Kitchen duty, overnight security, weekend inventory. The other soldiers started calling me Ghost, because I was always there but never really present. I was saving every penny, calculating and recalculating how long it would take to scrape together that $2,000 on my own. It would take 8 months. 8 months of living on ramen noodles and working myself to exhaustion. 8 months of watching other people advance, while I stayed stuck. But something had shifted in me that day at Martha's house. I wasn't just trying to finish my certification anymore. I was trying to prove something to myself, something that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with who I was becoming. 3 months later, I managed to finish my certification by taking out a small loan and selling everything I owned except the essential. When I passed the final exam with a 94%, I wanted to call someone, to share the moment with family. But I remembered Rebecca's laughter and Martha's cold dismissal, and I celebrated alone with a gas station sandwich and a Diet Coke. The certification opened doors I hadn't expected. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 job offers. I chose the one at a cybersecurity firm in Cincinnati, a 40-minute drive from Columbus, but a world away from the life I'd known. The salary was more than I'd ever imagined making, and they were willing to sponsor additional training. I moved into a better apartment, bought a reliable car, and started building a life that belonged entirely to me. But every Sunday, I found myself driving past the old neighborhood, past Martha's house with its perfect lawn and judgmental windows. I never stopped. I just drove by, reminding myself of where I'd come from and where I was going. One Sunday in spring, I saw Rebecca's BMW in the driveway. She was visiting with her husband and kids, the same weekly ritual that had been happening for years. I watched from my car as they unloaded expensive toys and designer shopping bags. Rebecca had married well, as Martha never tired of pointing out. She'd never worked a day in her life, never had to choose between rent and food, never had to prove her worth to anyone. I started the engine and drove away, but something had planted itself in my mind. A question that wouldn't leave me alone. What if I could buy my way into their world? What if I could show them that the girl they'd laughed at had become someone they couldn't ignore? It wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. About proving that their judgment had been wrong, that I was worthy of the space I occupied in the world. The idea came to me during a particularly boring meeting about network infrastructure. My boss was droning on about quarterly projections when I started thinking about real estate investment. I'd been saving aggressively for months, living well below my means and putting every extra dollar into a high-yield savings account. After work, I started researching property values in Columbus. The market was hot, but not impossibly so. I could afford a small investment property, maybe a duplex or a fixer-upper. But as I scrolled through listings, I kept coming back to one particular area, the neighborhood where Martha lived. It was an established area with good schools and stable property values. The kind of place where families stayed for generations, where everyone knew everyone else's business. The kind of place where a girl like me was always going to be an outsider, unless I owned. I spent the next 6 months learning everything I could about real estate investment. I took courses online, read books, talked to other investors. I learned about property taxes, zoning laws, rental income potential. I learned that knowledge was power, and power was something my family had never taught me to value. When I finally felt ready to make a move, I contacted a real estate agent in Columbus. I'm looking for investment properties in the Riverside area, I told her. Something with good long-term potential. She showed me several properties over the next month. A small duplex that needed work, a 3-bedroom house with rental potential, a vacant lot that could be developed. All of them were in the same general area, all of them were within my budget, but none of them felt right. None of them felt like the statement I was trying to make. Then, in November, she called with something different. "I have something unusual," she said. "It's not exactly what you asked for, but it might interest. There's a property owner who's looking to sell the land under an existing house. The current residents would become tenants, paying rent for the land their house sits on. It's an investment with immediate rental income, and no property maintenance." My heart started beating faster. Where is Riverside Drive? It's a beautiful area, very stable. The family has been there for decades. I knew before she said the address. I knew before she described the white colonial with the rose bushes and the circular drive. I knew because some part of me had been waiting for this moment, since that October afternoon when I walked out of Martha's house with my dignity intact and my future uncertain. I'd like to see it. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. The original owner had died, and his estate was being liquidated. The family living in the house, Martha and Tom, had assumed they would inherit everything. But the will had specified that the land would be sold separately. They had first right of refusal, but they'd have to pay market value. Apparently they couldn't afford it. I sat in the real estate office, reading through the documents with the same careful attention I'd learned to apply to military briefings. Every clause, every condition, every escape route. The asking price was within my budget, though it would take most of my savings. The rental income would be modest but steady. From a pure investment standpoint, it made sense. But this wasn't about pure investment. The current tenants, I said to the agent, are they aware of the situation? They know the land is being sold. She said, they're hoping to work out a long-term lease arrangement with whoever buys it. They've been very cooperative throughout the process. I wondered if Martha had any idea who was sitting in this office, reviewing the details of her future. I wondered if she remembered the girl who'd asked for $2,000, who'd been laughed at and dismissed and told she'd never been worthy of their family. I'll take it, I said. The closing was scheduled for the following month. I didn't tell anyone at work about the purchase. I didn't call my few friends to share the news. I just went through the motions of my daily life while carrying this secret knowledge like a stone in my chest. 3 days before the closing, I drove by the house. It was early evening, and the lights were on in the living room. I could see Martha through the window, sitting in her usual chair, probably watching the news or reading one of her romance novels. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile. For a moment I felt something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered her words. You never were quite right for this family. I drove away and didn't look back. The closing went smoothly. I signed document after document, transferred the money, and received a set of keys I would never need to use. The house was theirs. The land was mine. They would pay rent to live in their own home, and I would be their landlord. The irony wasn't lost on me. My lawyer handled the initial contact with Martha and Tom. They were informed that the new owner was willing to offer them a long-term lease at a reasonable rate. The name on the documents was listed as E. Monroe Properties, LLC. Not immediately recognizable, but not hidden either. I went back to my routine: work, gym, home, weekend trips to the city, online courses to keep my skills sharp. I was building a life that was entirely mine, entirely earned, entirely separate from the people who had shaped my childhood with their casual cruelty and benign neglect. But every month, when the rent check arrived, I thought about Martha sitting at her kitchen table, writing my name on the pay-to line. I wondered if she'd figured it out yet. I wondered if she remembered the girl who'd needed $2,000 for school. 6 months passed before I heard anything directly from them. It was a Saturday morning when my phone rang with the Columbus number I didn't recognize. Is this Evelyn Monroe? The voice was older, shakier than I remembered. This is she. This is Martha. Your Aunt Martha. We need to talk. My heart started racing, but my voice stayed calm. What about? You know what about. This business with the house. We need to work something out. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. Is there a problem with the lease agreement? There was a long pause. Don't play games with me, Evelyn. You know exactly what this is about. I'm a landlord collecting rent from tenants, I said. That's what this is about. This is about revenge. This is about you trying to hurt us because we couldn't help you with your little school problem. Little school problem. Even now, even when I held all the cards, she couldn't acknowledge what she'd done. She couldn't admit that she'd been wrong about me, wrong about my potential, wrong about my worth. I have to go. If you have any issues with the property, please contact my lawyer. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. Part of me had expected to feel triumphant. Part of me had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like I'd won a game I never really wanted to play. After Martha's call, I decided to drive by the house one more time. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the neighborhood was quiet. School buses had come and gone. Commuters hadn't yet returned from work. The street looked like a movie set, too perfect to be real. I parked across the street and just sat there, looking at the house where I'd spent so many uncomfortable holidays and awkward family gatherings. The rose bushes were blooming. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The windows sparkled in the afternoon sun. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I was a child, when I was a teenager, when I was a young woman desperate for $2,000. The only thing that had changed was me. As I was getting ready to leave, I saw Rebecca's BMW pull into the driveway. She got out with her usual dramatic flair, expensive sunglasses, designer purse, perfectly styled hair. She looked like she was heading to a photo shoot rather than visiting her mother. I watched her walk up the front steps, and something made me get out of my car. I couldn't have said what I was planning to do. I just knew I needed to be closer. I crossed the street and stood at the edge of the property, technically on land that I now owned. Rebecca was at the front door, fumbling with her keys. She looked up and saw me. Evelyn. Her voice was uncertain, confused. "What are you doing here?" "Just checking on my property," I said calmly. The color drained from her face. "Your property?" "I own the land your mother's house sits on. Didn't she tell you?" Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That's impossible. This is our family home." "It's your family home," I agreed, "on my land." The front door opened, and Martha appeared. She looked from Rebecca to me, and I saw the moment when she understood that her secret was out, that her daughter now knew exactly who owned the ground beneath their feet. "Mother," Rebecca said slowly. "What is she talking about?" Martha's face was pale, her hands shaking slightly. "Rebecca, let's go inside. We need to talk. We need to talk here," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "What does she mean?" "Her land. I could have left them. I could have walked away and let them figure it out privately, but something about Rebecca's shocked expression, about Martha's obvious distress, made me stay." "Your mother didn't tell you?" I said. "I'm your new landlord. Have been for 6 months." Rebecca turned to Martha with a look of pure horror. "You're paying rent to her, to Evelyn?" "The land was sold," Martha said quietly. "We couldn't afford to buy it." "But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" Martha's eyes met mine across the driveway. "Because I knew this would happen. I knew she'd do this to us." "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "I made a real estate investment. You're free to move whenever you want." "Move?" Rebecca's voice was shrill now. "This is our home, our family home. It's still your home," I said. "You just don't own the land anymore." I got back in my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the driveway, having the conversation they should have had months ago. The next week I received a call from my lawyer, Mrs. Monroe. "I've been contacted by the tenants at the Riverside property. They're interested in discussing a potential purchase agreement." I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting this since the confrontation in the driveway. "What kind of offer?" "They're proposing to buy the land for 80% of what you paid for. They claim the property has decreased in value since you purchased it." I almost laughed. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I'd present any serious offer to you, but that 80% of purchase price after 6 months seemed unrealistic." "It's not for sale," I said. "Not at any price." "Are you sure?" They seemed quite motivated. I thought about Martha's pale face, about Rebecca's shock, about all the years of small cruelties and casual dismissals. "I'm sure." That weekend I decided to take a different approach. Instead of driving by the house, I walked through the neighborhood. I wanted to see the area from a different perspective, to understand what I'd actually bought. The neighborhood was lovely, I had to admit. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, children playing in front yard. It was the kind of place where families put down roots and stayed for generations, the kind of place where property values remained stable because people took care of what they owned. I was walking past the house when I heard voices from the backyard. Martha and Rebecca were sitting on the patio, talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tension in their voices. "Should have told me from the beginning. Didn't want to worry you. She's doing this on purpose." "What did you expect after what we said?" I kept walking, but their words followed me. "What did you expect after what we said?" Even Martha knew. Even she understood that their treatment of me had consequences. The next morning, I received a handwritten letter in my mailbox. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive stationery that I recognized from Martha's correspondence. My name was written in her careful script across the front. Inside was a single page, also in Martha's handwriting. "Evelyn, I know you think we were cruel to you, and perhaps we were, but this isn't the way to handle old hurts. You're destroying our family over something that happened years ago. Please reconsider. We can work something out that benefits everyone." "Martha," I read the letter 3 times, looking for something that resembled an apology, something that acknowledged what they'd actually done to me. But there was nothing. Just a request for mercy from someone who had shown me none. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer with my other important documents. Not because I was keeping it for sentimental reasons, but because it was evidence of something I was still trying to understand. Summer came and went. I traveled to Portland for a cybersecurity conference, spent a week in the mountains with college friends, started dating a fellow veteran who made me laugh and didn't ask too many questions about my family. Life was good in ways I was still learning to appreciate. The rent checks continued to arrive on time. Martha never missed a payment, never was even a day late. I respected that about her, even as I struggled to respect much else. In September, I received another letter. This one was from Rebecca, written on her personal stationery with her monogram embossed at the top. Evelyn, I want to apologize for the way we treated you that day. I was wrong to laugh at you, and I'm sorry. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how hard it must have been for you to ask for help. I was privileged and thoughtless, and I hurt you when you were vulnerable. I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know. Rebecca. I stared at the letter for a long time. It was the first real apology I'd received from any of them, the first acknowledgement that they'd done something wrong. It should have made me happy. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it made me sad. I thought about the girl I'd been that October afternoon, desperate for $2,000 and naive enough to believe that family would help family. I thought about the woman I'd become, successful and independent and capable of buying the land beneath their house on a whim. Both versions of me deserved better than what they'd offered. I wrote back, a short note on plain paper. Rebecca, thank you for your apology. I accept it. This was never about revenge. It was about building a life where I don't need anyone's permission to exist. I hope you understand. Evelyn. I never heard back from her, but I didn't expect to. That October, exactly 1 year after the day that changed everything, I received a call from my lawyer. Mrs. Monroe, I have some news about the Riverside property. The tenants have decided to move out. They're breaking the lease and moving to Florida to be closer to their daughter. I felt something in my chest loosen, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. When, end of the month, they're asking if you'd be willing to waive the early termination fee, given the circumstances. What circumstances? Apparently Mrs. Brennan's health hasn't been good. They feel they need to be closer to family. Family, the word that had meant everything to me once, and now meant something entirely different. Waive the fee, I said, and send them my best wishes. The house sat empty for 2 months. I hired a property management company to handle the maintenance and start showing it to potential tenants. I could have sold it, could have taken my profit and moved on, but something kept me holding on to it. One Saturday in December, I drove by the house one last time. The for rent sign was gone, and there were lights in the windows. New tenants had moved in. A young couple with a baby, according to my property manager. They were teachers at the local elementary school, excited to have found such a beautiful place to start their family. I parked in the same spot where I'd sat that day when I confronted Rebecca. The house looked the same, but it felt different, lighter somehow, like it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I thought about Martha, probably sitting in some retirement community in Florida, playing bridge and complaining about the weather. I thought about Rebecca, still driving her BMW and shopping at expensive stores, but maybe thinking twice before she laughed at someone else's dream. I thought about the girl I'd been, walking out of that house with empty hands and a wounded heart. She'd needed $2,000 for school, and she'd been denied. She'd been told she wasn't worthy, wasn't good enough, wasn't right for their family. She'd been wrong about one thing. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their money. She didn't need their family. She needed to become someone who could buy the land beneath their house and then choose to let it go. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. I want to sell the Riverside property. To the current tenants, if they're interested, at cost. At cost. Are you sure? Property values have increased significantly since you purchased it. I'm sure, and I want to do it as an owner finance deal. Low down payment, reasonable monthly payments, make it easy for them. Can I ask why? I looked at the house one more time, at the warm lights glowing in the windows, at the small Christmas tree visible in the front window, because they're building something beautiful there, and because I'm done carrying this weight. The paperwork was finalized before New Year. I signed over the deed to Sarah and Michael Chen, a couple who sent me a handwritten thank you note with a photo of their 6-month-old daughter. They promised to take good care of the roses. I never drove by the house again. I didn't need to. I had proven everything I needed to prove, to them and to myself. 2 months later, I received a wedding invitation from Rebecca. She was marrying for the second time, apparently, and wanted to invite me to the ceremony. At the bottom, she'd written a personal note. I know we have history, but you're still family. I hope you'll come. I sent a polite decline with a generous gift from their registry. Family, I'd learned, wasn't about blood or shared history or even forgiveness. It was about choosing to build something together, to support each other's dreams instead of tearing them down. I had found my family. It was small and chosen and earned, built from friendships forged in foxholes and trust earned through consistency and love that asked for nothing except the chance to grow. That girl who needed $2,000 for school, she got so much more than an education. She got herself back, she got the life she deserved, and she got the peace that comes from knowing that sometimes, the best revenge is living well and then choosing to let go. Martha never knew that I sold the house. She never knew that I could have held on to it forever, could have been a distant landlord collecting rent from strangers. She never knew that I chose to let it go, chose to let young teachers build their dreams where she had once crushed mine. Maybe that was its own kind of justice. Maybe that was enough. I kept Rebecca's wedding invitation in my desk drawer for a while, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of something I was still learning to understand. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting or even about reconciliation. It's about choosing to stop letting old wounds dictate your future. The last time I thought about that October afternoon, I was sitting in my own house. A house I'd bought with my own money, filled with furniture I'd chosen, decorated with photos of friends who celebrated my successes instead of mocking my struggle. I was reading a book about network security, still learning, still growing, still becoming the person I was meant to be. I realized I couldn't remember the exact sound of Rebecca's laughter anymore. I couldn't remember the precise words Martha had used to dismiss me. The details had faded, leaving only the lesson. I was enough. I had always been enough, and I never needed anyone's permission to prove it. That night, I deleted their contact information from my phone, not out of anger but out of peace. I was done carrying their weight. I was done letting their limitations define my possibilities. I was free.